Good afternoon, everybody.
All right, we're unmuted.
We are unmuted if the three of you did not hear that.
Had their volume turned up, Dewey.
Oh, let me.
I hear you. Hello.
Okay, we can hear you. Sorry.
It's okay.
Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Are we ready to get started?
Think so.
Okay. And there were a bunch of different agendas that I saw, but I think the most recent one had us starting with an executive session. Is that correct? Actually, with public comment and then executive session.
That's correct.
Okay. So that said, I'll kick off the December 14th Board of County Commissioner meeting. It's 2 p.m. and we'll start with public comment. If anybody has joined us today to make a public comment, please raise your hand and you will be moved over and we can hear what you have to say. And I do see somebody, Jonathan Kane has his hand raised.
There we go. He should be a panelist now.
Okay, thanks. Hey, Jonathan, we see you. We don't see your smiling face yet, and you're muted.
Sorry, everyone, I was a little slow there.
Okay, perfect. Floor is yours. Just let us know who you are, where you live, and what you had to say.
My name is Jonathan Kane. I live in Arvada and I work in the city of Idaho Springs. I wanted to just express my admiration for the county's services that they provided in terms of the roundabout for the past several years in spite of the looming fiscal crisis that's happening in Clear Creek County. I think that it's been admirable work making sure that residents of this place can access the critical community resources available to them here. I know that there's some hard decisions that need to be made about that service. And I think that there's some opportunities for us to work collectively to make sure that that service continues for our residents in this place. And I think that the city of Idaho Springs is definitely willing to talk to the county about those things and see how we might make sure that we maintain a level of service for everyone in this county in terms of transportation. And that's the entirety of my comment.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure in the new year, we will be following up and taking you up on that offer to start that dialogue. Is there, are there any other public comments today?
Not that I see.
Okay, and the room is empty. Brian, is that fair to say?
No public in the room, all staff.
Okay, perfect. So then we'll close public comment, and then I would like to move the Board of County Commissioners move into executive session to discuss the following matters.
Pursuant to CRS 24640224B, for the county attorney to meet with the Board of County Commissioners for the purpose of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions pertaining to the board's budget authority pursuant to the local government budget law of Colorado.
Second.
We have a motion, and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, the board will now move into executive session. No written minutes will be kept. No decisions will be made. I'm not sure how long this conversation will take. Maybe 30 minutes. We'll see. So we will leave this meeting open. And we will return when we're done.
And I did send the link, so you should have it.
Okay, I'll see you guys on the other side.
Thanks.
We'll just wait for George to return and then we'll get going. All right. We have everyone we need, Brian, to move forward and get restarted.
I just promoted the sheriff and the undersheriff to panelists. I'm not sure if they're coming. Oh, they're here. Just kidding.
Oh, perfect. I see you walking in. Okay, and then before we get started, I just want to mention that, yeah, the board has returned from our executive session. No written minutes were kept, no decisions were made. We already handled public comments, so we will move directly into the work session. And I note on the packet that I'm looking at, there are 21 different items. It looks like they're pretty much all sheriff related, plus then the firewall at the end. Is there anything else that's part of those 21 that I'm overlooking, Brian?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Sheriff, Undersheriff, thank you for joining us. I'm going to be turning it over to you in a minute. This is a special work session that we scheduled as a follow-up from our conversation. I believe it was last Tuesday in advance of finalizing the budget next Tuesday. And as a little bit of background, we are looking aggressively everywhere we can to find savings, and we had asked for your cooperation in kind of sharpening your proverbial pencil and looking around your operation to find areas of savings. I note that there's a lot of information that you provided. Thank you for that. I had a good look at it. I can't say that I understood all of it. And I'm not sure that it would be beneficial for us to go over that in great detail today. So maybe rather than that, I'll turn it over to you, Rick, and maybe you can kind of take us through the summary or the high level findings, or essentially just kind of cut to the chase and let us know where you potentially have identified savings for the 2023 budget. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Please, please.
You can sit over there, Diane. Thank you. I'm gonna turn it over to John. He's the one who put the PowerPoint together.
Okay.
Yeah, and to save a little bit of time, would it be reasonable to say stipulating or agreeing to compressed work weeks, CWWs, the 10-hour shifts, the best practice, cutting back on overtime, some of those initial few PowerPoints are easy to skip over? Would we be in agreement that that's all negative of overtime and so forth?
Yeah, and like I said, I would leave it to your discretion. You don't need to show any of the slides if you don't need to kind of get to the bottom line.
Well, and that's what I'd like to get to. I wanted to provide all the information, all the supporting documents we use to come up with the survey of our internal workings and look at it in depth so that y'all could vet it. I was informed a couple of the stats might be inaccurate because of HR sending over a wrong stat, minor detail that in the scheme of things, we're still heavy in overtime and such. So, all right. So then the first couple of pages of that PowerPoint were impacts of what it's doing to the organization, the amount of overtime and so forth. So I'm going to jump all the way to forward to slide 7,
You want me to go?
if you could.
Yep. Let me share my screen for you.
And if anyone else in the public, whatnot, downloaded it or following along, they can see through it fairly quickly or review it later.
I don't know if it says page number on here.
Slide 7.
NIJ, please. Keep going.
Got it. Thank you.
And just short and sweet, I'm going to start cutting through fairly quick to get to the end so we can get to the meaningful dialogue. We're down 11 and a half full-time employees, FTEs, the equivalents. And so the amount of overtime that we're going through to backfill and fill these openings is huge. And that's also not including supervisors that are salaried. So some of the issues, next slide, is from the KRW Associate Study that was ordered by the BOCC a couple of years ago. So in going through the KRW study, which we're going to brief in on January 24th coming up, we're going to follow up on it again. We've been making a lot of positive movement through the KRW Associate Study, the operational assessment and so forth, and making changes. We're going to highlight a few of those in here, but to save time, but point of public record, there was the point that the sheriff's office is staffed with talented, proud, and professional employees. I mean, that's a powerful statement. They're part of the family of the county. So there's been a lot going on in this last year that's been tough for them. Loss of an undersheriff, public events. I mean, it's been stressful, and they're hanging in and putting in a ton of hours. Overtime, some paid, some unpaid. What I mean by unpaid is salaried. So it's difficult. And here we are trying to look very deep and hard into cuts because we understand we're all part of the county. So moving on to the next slide, it's additional key issues. And I want to talk on some current events too, just to highlight how short-staffed and we still are, as well as previously in this KRW. It talks about inadequate coverage, talks about one person on at a time. This morning, even a dispatcher, a communications officer, working a house fire, family gets out, house burns down, and then other 911 calls come in and so forth. It's tough. And we understand there's a budget issue and so forth, but we're trying to keep our head above water, and right now we're snorkeling. Right now with the compressed work weeks for 75 full-time employees and being down 11 and a half, we are spending a lot of overtime hours. Again, not including supervisors. And I keep repeating that because on another slide, we're going to talk about the amount of hours they're putting in to fill shifts. It's inadequate. It cuts down on supervision. It cuts down on some of the other duties that they were doing, that they need to be doing as a supervisor to help run the office, to help support the staff that's out there. So we're also looking to do more with less, a co-responder program that's been brought up on many different points. A grant's out there just for the co-responder, but it doesn't include any staff or anything else. So we're trying to do more with less. We've got an increased calls for service and additional mandates that state legislators require per state law that was unfunded. So looking at this slide and talking about some of the allocation and what we need and demand and how it's all not fitting, bleeds over to the next slide that really gives an overview of where we're at and why. So that unmet demand on the left side is the fact that we're being a little bit more reactive, responding to calls instead of being proactive. It means we're not as effective in some of our community policing in the neighborhoods. We're a little bit more concentrated on the response to calls than getting ahead of the calls. And we're trying to keep staff. So if you compare to some of the other counties and police agencies and some of the offers that they've got, even up to $20,000 hire-on bonuses, we do keep losing people. We currently have one in backgrounds expected to leave shortly, and we have another one that has already put in a letter of resignation to go elsewhere. So when we've looked at some of the comments about hiring freezes, that's even more difficult because then that becomes a cut in service when we're just trying to refill open positions. We understand looking at some of the budget reduction, and we're trying to be very meaningful, and you're asking about FTEs. We're not refilling some of the open positions, and we're going to get into a little bit more stats on it. But right now, given the dire circumstances, a lot of the immediate cuts are going to be either small programs, some of like software or something else where we're trying to combine 2 to 1. It's not the same as the FTEs y'all were talking about. But some of those FTEs and other things, animal shelter we'll get to, those take long time commitments. It's a long-term goal to discuss, talk to stakeholders and others. So moving on to the next slide. So I've got a stat and I brought up 22%. I don't know if there's a better update from Human Resources, but the stat I was given was 22% of paid time off PTO was what was used this year compared to what is available. And that's just not even a quarter of our staff being able to take time off. I understand county manager saying there might be a discrepancy on what was provided to us. I'm not going to harp on that too much. Either way, whatever the stat is, we're behind because there's not enough time for people to take their paid time off. I was also verbally told that only a few of the floating holidays were used by sheriff's office staff. It's another benefit that's not being used because there's no way to use it. And if anyone does use it, we're paying overtime to backfill. Supervisors then have to cover a shift and they aren't getting paid for that. So many hourly staff are starting to make more than supervisors that are salaried.
Commissioners, that first bullet on that slide is the one I was referencing. That 2,790 hours of taken for PTO. That number is almost closer to 8,000 hours taken in 1 year of PTO, not 2,790. That's the incorrect number.
And so was that allotted this year or how?
2,790 is the number of hours taken out of the number of hours accrued this year.
Okay.
You've actually paid out almost 8,000 hours in PTO this year. So that's time off people take that you're approving.
And does that include any of the PTO cash out?
No, that almost 8,000 is not the PTO cash out.
And so the cash out are those topping out where it's a use it or lose it?
Yes, that's correct. But people can cash out PTO whether they're capped or not.
Right.
Yeah.
But rather than lose it, we would rather them take it off. Don't get me wrong. That's an hour for an hour. And that's what's technically budgeted in a salary or hourly wage for a yearly annual. So we get that taking it off and it's an additional expense if it's paid out. But if they're going to use it or lose it, it is saving 50%, even though it's an expense. So understood. Okay. The hourly paid overtime of 7,477, is that still accurate?
Your OT hours for year to date are 7,466.
66, okay. Either way, a lot of overtime, and again, not including supervisors that are on salary. Accurate to say? Because we have an estimated 6,320 additional hours that supervisors have had to use to fill in, backfill, whether or not it's filling in a shift, backfill if someone's out of town on training and so forth. Because we have mandatory training hours set by the state that we have to keep up with, post regulations and such that someone has to go to training. We still have to cover detentions, dispatch, patrol 24/7. So
Was
on
there a
the,
question in the comments?
I'm sorry?
Was there a question in the comments that we need to answer?
There was a question about 68% of PTO taken, and the answer is yes.
Yeah, that was me. Is my math right? That's 63% of PTO was used.
Yep.
Yes.
Does anybody have a comment on whether
Is that
that
a bad thing?
number is appropriate or reflective of being understaffed or?
Well, PTO has to be approved, and if we don't have enough staff, sometimes we don't necessarily, or maybe can't approve PTO. You can't always approve it sometimes, depending on your staffing levels, right?
So maybe an interesting number would be, and we don't need this number to make a decision today or anything, but just to satisfy my curiosity, maybe a number that could be more interesting is how many PTO hours were denied?
How many do you think,
how many are,
Brian?
I would have to guess 0.
You would guess wrong. There are a lot of detentions deputies downstairs, so that 68% is 75 employees. So you're saying none of those 75 employees should have taken any vacation time, still keep accruing it? Is that what you're saying, Brian?
Anybody say that?
Because that's what your face says.
Did not hear
No,
anybody say that.
that's not what Brian is saying. It's not what I heard, at least.
well, and I know we've had family emergencies and other things that have really dictated some of the prioritization of people having time off. So even 63, 68%, whatever that percentage is still fairly inappropriate as trying to make sure we're keeping our employees proactive, performing, and showing up for work. I mean, it's a tough year. I don't need to keep restating the obvious. So
Yeah, okay.
I used I'm sorry, go ahead, Commissioner.
I was just going to say thank you. That makes sense. I mean, 100% is obviously the goal. So.
Thank you. So I use some other stats, and this is getting into the next slide of Department of Justice recommended shift relief factor. This is the way that the Department of Justice says you need to look at worst case scenario. Every single hour of leave being used. I did not include in the floating holiday on the majority of the factors, except for the very last one, because I still didn't have the full stat and reaching out to human resources. But just the history of this shift relief factor, what it is the way the Department of Justice said, you need to be able to make sure this is your bottom line to have for someone to be filling in that position. If you have to backfill, it's overtime, it's supervisors and so forth. If you do not want to have as much overtime backfill from supervisors and so forth, you need to include one FTE above the shift relief factor. So to calculate a shift relief factor, they take every single day of the year, 365, you multiply it times the shift, an 8-hour, 10-hour, 12-hour shift. And then all your time that could be taken off. So it's the 3 days off on a 410 or 2 days on a 5/8 schedule and so forth. 7 out of 14 if you're on 12-hour shifts. You take your time off. You calculate in any other paid time off, vacation, sick. So I had to basically bring that to what the county standard is, your holidays, PTO, and sick. And then work basically times and then divide. So I did provide in some of the packets, and it is on the agenda, the entire comparison for an 8-hour shift, 10-hour shift, 12-hour shift. So with that, it all was just around 2 FTEs per shift. And that's a minimum with backfill requiring overtime or supervisors and such. If we needed to not utilize as much supervisors covering shift or overtime, we need 3 FTEs per shift for patrol, detentions, dispatch. We are well below that. And that's reiterated even in the KRW Associates study. The next slide shows the actual calculation that is most appropriate for us right now with the 10-hour shift. We still have detentions on 12-hour shifts. We are reviewing that to see if there's any ways to better our delivery of service on that. So the calculation equals 1.8 FTE. Not that you could actually have a 0.8 in. So you're having to round up for 2. And again, that's without backfill. That's your minimum per Department of Justice recommended relief factor in scheduling for law enforcement services. I provided all the documents that support this. If you have a lot of time to read, I think we uploaded 500 pages or so. So where we're at with this, we're trying to use some of the priority-based budgeting, a term I heard you guys use multiple times previously, I've looked at. We're trying to look at our delivery of services, prioritize it. What is our best use source? What is our best allocation? Fine tune whether or not it's programs, a couple hours here, a couple hours there. There's been discussion on some of them. Right now, the KRW study supports a lot of this priority-based budgeting. They recommended some alignment on the organizational chart to help span some of the supervision. We are changing a few of those beginning of next year. I did actually provide a copy of what the new organizational chart's going to be, but you guys are familiar with the KRW study. I included it in the uploads for those that are not, and some of the recommendations and where we're going with it. We're trying to better balance the organization with supervisors. That helps with fill in and backfill. It helps with supervisors actually being there to help make decisions and oversee the operations. The next slide actually shows our next recommendation and balancing it out. It's moving dispatch under our special operations, our special services division, balancing out animal control with patrol services and all the supervisors. This has been a topic of discussion before. Does anyone have any questions or comments specifically to the organizational chart or any of this?
I don't, but I would just ask that maybe we could focus on things directly related to the 2023 budget. We only have one more meeting this year, and you have a lot of slides. I don't know how far along we are into them right now.
We're getting close to the actual end and a little bit more conversation. That's why I'm trying to be very quick.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. So, and on to the next one, maximizing some of our talent and so forth. Looking at some of the programs, instead of reading every bullet point, you see, I'm just trying to highlight because I think there's a little bit more conversation to be had. But we do have some savings insight. We are looking at the different computer programs. Again, not a huge one, but every little dollar counts. We're trying to combine some of the resources to see if we can allow someone to do a little bit more and maybe let an FTE not be refilled. One of those was kitchen staff. There's been a couple different discussions on some of that on the kitchen. She's putting in 300 hours as a kitchen manager in overtime and still utilizing some of the inmate workers and detention deputies to assist in keeping food services for the jail. Maybe we look at not refilling that one FTE or splitting it because we still have an FTE that is a control tech. If we could maybe do a half and a half to make one full FTE, these are things that we are looking at hard to see what is our best operational goal to deliver the service without a bunch of liability. That brings up even the KRW study says that we're short on staffing of nurses, yet we have been unable to fill a 0.5 FTE, a part-time nurse, for lack of better terms.
Mm-hmm.
So do we cut that to save a couple of bucks and risk a little bit more liability? That's a tough one to say right now. I know we're looking at cuts. Currently, a half FTE, 0.5 nurse would be one of them.
How long has that rec been out there, unable to be filled?
Over a year, I think. Same with the kitchen manager one. We've had some people apply and then remove their application.
Yeah, I mean, we made some adjustments to, for example, the attorney's office to remove contingency that he'd been unable to staff. And so I think it's reasonable to consider that, knowing that, we could always do a supplemental appropriation if hiring conditions changed and it actually became more feasible to hire someone like that.
Agreed.
Good.
One of the larger discussions, which is not an immediate one, but has been stated, is the animal shelter. That's on the next slide, 18. The animal shelter is a necessity. It's not an argument that they're providing a valuable service to the community. But with that being said, is it more appropriate that another organization man and staff it and take control over that? Currently, the sheriff's office is providing that service, but not owner of the building. There's deed restrictions that have to be considered. There's other organizations that have an interest in it, but that entails county attorney and BOCC and so forth.
You don't own the building?
We do own the
Deed
building, but it's
restrictions.
deed restricted.
Understand that. He just said we didn't own the building, so
Sheriff's
The
office
sheriff's
doesn't.
office doesn't.
county owns the building.
County does, correct. So we can't just sell it for positive income. It's deed restricted to animal services and so forth, the way it was donated into the county. Foothills has stated there's an interest in it, but there's also improvements to the building that need to be vetted out. A new HVAC system, or at least upgrade or replacement because of failures on it. So we need to get some additional information on it, see if it's truly $400,000 to $500,000 to replace, or is there a lower bid that would fulfill that? I don't have an answer to it right now, but it's something that needs to be looked at. So my point on animal services, the shelter, is that is a budget item that could be as $300,000 or $400,000 saving between FTEs and cost of the building and so forth. That needs to be looked at, but that is a mid 2023 to even longer range goal, because once we start coming up with a plan, we need to talk to all the stakeholders, the municipalities in the county as well as Gilpin County, because those are services being provided for multiple agencies, not just Clear Creek. And so county attorney would have to be involved, BOCC, if there was any sale or transfer of title, or if it's going to be leased out, because if you're going to lease out the building, then it needs to be upgraded. So huge potential savings, but not immediate, not fast enough for today or the 20th budget decision. But we're trying to bring to the table some additional information and options, and this is one of the larger ones that needs to be vetted out and discussed. And it's not just our own decision. It's a little bit more involved with BOCC. Does it make sense? Any questions on animal shelter? Okay, moving on. Detentions, I actually already hit on some of that with kitchen staff and the nurse. So there's savings to be had. What is the best way to continue operations with or without that half nurse, the 0.5 FTE, as well as we've got a couple other positions, the control tech that maybe we could combine or just not replace. Savings would most likely be under 100,000 if we were to add up a few of the dollars. One of the things that has come up for patrol on the next slide, we currently have a ranger position. It's our entry-level patrol deputy. So that is an additional FTE that could be cut, but it also affects patrol services. There's also ideas and potential to discuss on if that could be combined to serve additional roles to support delivery of services to residents in the county, whether or not it's combining with the co-responder program or planning and attorney. They have been looking for a code enforcement officer. What about a combination of that? We currently have records management system. We are used to responding out on calls. We could diverge and say, this is a littering and a criminal offense, or is this something else that needs to be cited, have environmental health planning, support documents. Our record system then provides it over to the county attorney's office for enforcement. So maybe combining two, maximizing some services, bringing in additional utilization and alignment to serve multiple purposes on both sides of the county, law enforcement and BOCC side. But it's not serving as a true cut. That's combining 2 to 1. There is some savings versus outright cutting a patrol deputy. So cuts are being constantly assessed and looked at right now. I'm also looking at revenue. So moving on to a revenue increase versus expense. The KRW study states that the federal U.S. Marshal contract inmates is not adding an expense to our baseline deputies for running a county jail. So with that being said, we can continue to serve, get U.S. Marshals, bring in an average of $1 million to $1.2 million a year to offset some of the expenses. We can increase a few more U.S. Marshal inmates to bring in additional funding. That is a positive revenue. And we are actually working on increasing the daily amount we charge to the U.S. Marshals from $83 to approximately $100 to the going rate. That's an additional increase of revenue to help offset some of the deficit, but the expense from the sheriff's office. We can bring in more of the U.S. Marshal inmates once we finish using some of the allocated ARPA funds to finish upgrading the shower. We've got a few that need replacement, and finish fixing some of the toilets. We're trying to save some money. Instead of replacing the entire toilet fixture, we're just replacing the parts in it. That'll save additional funds, not only from the sheriff's office, but the ARPA fund, which is outside of the budget. It's just additional set aside funds. So currently 50,000 has been spent. A lot of that is also including some of the parts that were ordered and in hand waiting to be installed. So we will have a lower expense, and then we can bring in additional U.S. Marshal inmates. Again, following KRW recommendations and study. That would increase revenue. The next slide over actually shows a little bit more of a breakdown. And the breakdown on it actually will show the amount of revenue and expense, as well as the low cost that it costs for housing a federal inmate, so that we have the positive cash flow coming in from billing out the services of transport and housing federal inmates. Per the KRW study, our staff would be the same. So we didn't allocate out any of the staff costs on the federal inmates. That's going to be food and other things. And the majority of that is reimbursed for like medications. We aren't dealing with medications for U.S. Marshals and so forth. Again, not getting too far from the savings, but I'm trying to give a bigger picture. Is there any questions on the Marshals contract or where we're at with those numbers?
I think that I don't want to have this discussion today, because I think as we study the jail more thoroughly going forward, we'll be able to get into that depth, and we don't have time today because we're dealing with an annual budget. I contest a couple of the statements that you made regarding the KRW report, implying that it was that more federal inmates was better. What they did was describe the dynamic that we have today. And it is true that you don't have to increase every single position for the number of inmates that you bring in terms of federal inmates. But that's also driven by the size of the jail that's been built in order to house a federal inmate program, which is why a larger jail was built years ago. So it's a really big discussion when we look at an aging jail going down the road. But in any case, in terms of how that impacts this year's budget, I think that that's one of those things that we're going to be talking about down the road, and the result of that conversation will then dictate whether that's an actual source of increased revenues for us.
I wanted to add also, I did a little bit of asking around at the CCI conference this week, which was all the county commissioners in the entire state, or, you know, they were all invited, regarding the that number, the 83 to 100. And I have a couple of other data points and maybe a person to connect you to as well. So I'll follow up with you about that under Sheriff coming offline.
Thank you. Okay, appreciate that. Okay, again, saving time, going to move forward to just a few other potential revenue increases that we're looking at, which are surcharges on citations, reevaluating what is not a state-defined fee So certain things that we are actually performing services on, VIN inspections and records requests and so forth. Those are all defined by the state. Other ones that are not, we're exploring, as well as surcharges. That could be a model traffic code, a county citation that would help offset some costs. Never cover the entire cost, but it's helping to offset. So revenue is huge. It needs to be constantly assessed and reassessed. I don't think that everything should be specifically a true cut. We need to be looking at where can we increase revenue, because we have to. Cost of everything else is going up. Just last night, I saw that I believe the cost of inflation is at 7.8 for the last month. Without digressing, cost of services has gone up. We're trying to find ways to help offset that. The courts have some additional, we've already had a meeting with and talking with them that would assess additional reimbursement of costs for cost of care and so forth. So, yeah, moving forward just to try and get to the end so we can have additional conversation. Really, it's about, we've got some options and some ideas that are in the works. You can't immediately shut down an animal shelter or start dropping off FTEs or laying people off when we're trying to just keep people on the street for basic public safety services. In 2015, the last stat I received actually from finance was that our FTEs have not increased. In fact, we're still holding at the same FTEs. Yes, budget has increased and things have increased for cost of services, but our FTEs have stayed the same. We're trying to find ways to mitigate that or drop a few off, but it's going to take time contracting and realizing what services like animal shelter can be contracted out. Right now, that's the only one that's coming as something that needs to be discussed with the BOCC and other stakeholders. And that is going to take some time, and it's not going to be an answer for today or the 20th for budget. Am I missing anything?
I don't think so.
So thank you for that. Obviously, a lot of work went into that from your team. I guess I'm just going to ask the obvious question. You mentioned a lot of things that were the potential for next year, and I had a couple of ideas too. And I think we'll open up the conversation with George and Randy and our staff as well. But you mentioned some positions that you felt like maybe you were willing to take out of the budget. What would you feel good about doing that we can discuss in like 5 or 10 minutes right now? That is a short-term December 20th budget number type of element.
The nurse would be the one of the hard ones to deal with, as well as the other kitchen staff. There's 1.5 FTEs that are just, they haven't been filled. We will still have to figure out additional deputies or supervisors, someone else to assist in some of those roles. But fast and foremost, that's it. Everything else is going to take a little bit more time. We can, yeah, ranger, if you want to remove that patrol deputy, the ranger position, unless you're looking to combine them. Forgot about that. I did mention it earlier. That would be one more FTE from patrol.
And that's
So it's
something
just
that hasn't been staffed in some time, since Tony's placement hasn't been around for a while.
I'm going to slice the pie on that a little bit, and
We had another one right after Tony,
Yeah.
or was it Darrington?
Yeah,
we've had a bunch. Technically, they keep, I mean, even Thornton,
yeah.
a lot of, basically the ranger position is our entry-level patrol deputy. The actual title is just patrol deputy. It's not, there's not a separate title of ranger or anything in job descriptions for the county. It is a patrol services deputy. It was more assigned as you are a ranger, you are assisting in getting out into the open space and parks and additional parking and enforcement of OHVs and
They're the ones that approved it, so they know.
yeah,
They know
so
what the ranger position is.
Yeah.
It's a new position that was just started a few years ago for the purpose of actually mitigating another problem that we'd identified. I don't think we saw it. I mean, I'm sure you can use it as entry-level deputy position, but that wasn't the reason it was created, for sure.
Right.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
so recognizing this is not a budget cut, But if the sheriff's willing to give up the ranger, our EMS director and our HR and our human services director are very adamant that we need an officer assigned to the co-responder program. Sheriff has indicated that that is not something he believes he can do at this point, given his staffing levels. But if they're willing to give this ranger up, then can that not become the deputy assigned to co-responder? So that you would have to hire it and assign it to co-responder.
I can't assign somebody co-responder right now.
Right, but you're willing to give up the ranger position. So let's take that, hire it as a deputy,
We do that.
and
Yeah.
then assign it to co-response. That's what I'm suggesting.
Right, that's what we suggested earlier too.
Correct.
Okay, I mean, I think we have a little bit of process to go through with respect to the, because we haven't yet heard about the grant award for that, have we?
We have not.
Okay. So I think that's, I thank you for bringing that up. Do we know roughly, so that's 2.5 FTEs, what the fully loaded costs of those budget changes would be? And I don't know, Diane, whether you would have that number or maybe.
Oh, just,
or both of you.
yeah, just salary rise, the kitchen manager, entry patrol deputy and half medical is 159,889. So you'd have to factor in the benefits on those. Well, the half doesn't get benefits, but
On the 2 FTEs, you would.
right, on the 2 FTEs.
Maria,
So about 160,000.
Benefits are typically in the sheriff's office about 35% of the salary.
I was told there'd be no math today.
You have a finance director.
Yeah, 35. So that's, so 35% of that's another 60,000 roughly.
200,000.
So that, yeah. Okay. It's roughly so close to 220 for that potential change. George, Randy, what questions do you have for the sheriff's team that you haven't asked already?
I just, on this conversation about potential cuts, I did take a careful look at the KRW report. Thank you, Sheriff, for referencing it. The KRW report specific to detentions makes it very clear, like they're very emphatic that our current level of staffing is inadequate. And so, I can come up with I had come up with some logic, but thought maybe those positions were not justified. I think at this point, given that KRW emphatically feels opposite of that, and the sheriff agrees, I'm not going to try to say that I'm smarter than those two parties. The KRW report does say we should do a staffing study in the jail, and I'd love to see that happen so that we can get some real answers to these questions. But I have the same concern. So I've kind of backed off of thinking that we need to remove those vacant positions in detentions. I have the same concern about that medical position, about removing it. Because KRW is very emphatic that we need it. And so I have some hesitation about that. I have some hesitation about making cuts to patrol, especially if we're in the middle of a conversation about needing to find space to assign someone to co-response. And so what you're talking about, what you're talking about is the kitchen manager. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
But like Sean said earlier, so the reason those positions we're willing to be able to cut them is because we've not been able to fill them. So you can leave them on our budget, but if you don't have somebody applying and accepting that job, you're not using that space. So when Sean said before, maybe we can later on, if the staffing atmosphere changes, then you do a budget adjustment for that. Should that happen? Yeah, we'd love to keep the nurse, but having that half-time position out there right now with nobody applying for it does nothing for us. So if it can help, so if it can help with this budget issue, then yes, let's get through some budget stuff first. Once we get over that hump, then try and deal with it, bringing it back.
My problem is I could use that same logic for in your jail, right? Where you've got a bunch of open positions that have been open for years. And you're asking for them to be open because you need them to be fully staffed, right? And
Right,
so
but
that same logic
But our detentions deputies, those positions are being filled with overtime and salaried positions. The halftime nurse is being covered by 2 salaried. It's not generating any overtime. The kitchen manager one is generating some overtime if you have to have a deputy in there watching. Our programs manager, who is 20 hours a week, she's been getting some overtime, additional hours because she's been filling in for parts of that. But the patrol or the detentions deputies positions that are empty are generating a lot of overtime. The nurse is not.
It's going to be hard to find a halftime nurse. Nurses are in such a demand right now that they're not going to come up to Clear Creek County for a halftime position.
It's no benefits and it's a lower pay per hour anyway.
Yeah, it's going to be tough to fill that position.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, really just kind of taking it back to a more general, if there are savings that you guys have identified that you think are wise in your budget for this year, then I think I'd be in support of that. I would not like to see that we're removing positions from patrol. But that's of course your office, right? And so
We had Andrea.
Yes.
Andrea also helping periodically throughout the year, and now she's moved on. So, we are finding other ways to help out.
I think by naming one position like the ranger and stating that we're not taking people off patrol, we're just eliminating that position. That is, you stated a moment ago, a deputy position. And a good number of the calls that we get that our deputies need to respond to are the things that person does. That person was primarily responding, I know in large part, to complaints from citizens about illegal activities, whether it was shooting and stuff, the stuff that goes on in the unincorporated county where the sheriff's department is responsible. And so I'm afraid, I'm not sure that that's a real savings without reducing a patrol staff position, because that's definitely a patrol function at the end of the day. It's not that I don't understand the logic. It's just that I think effectively it does remove somebody from patrol, because somebody's going to have to still answer those calls.
I agree.
Yes.
We're getting down to, and I've been saying this the last 7 months, that we are at minimum staff. If we start cutting staff now, we're going to have to cut services to the county residents. And Randy, that, to your point, that would be one of the positions that would be, and it would be on a priority basis on an ATV complaint or something like this. So it's getting to that point where we're down to minimal staff, and hopefully all the information that you got today, you can look at that and read it and see that. And now we have to, just like the animal shelter, it's not really cutting services, but it's moving the domino pieces around before they tumble. And that's where we're getting, is into that tumble where we're going to have to start cutting services to the county. And that's public safety. And we really have to take that into serious account when we start cutting into public safety.
Public safety has to be the priority. I have hours of stuff I'd love to keep talking on. I was trying to keep it as fast and furious as possible, given the fact that's even a later starting. You have all the documents. We can keep talking offline or not, however you would like to readdress any of it. We're going to have a few additional small minor saving on some uniforms and such, but those are not as large scale or meaningful as the FTEs that you're addressing. So that's where we're coming from. 2015 was 75 FTEs. There was additional cuts and savings in 2017, and these are per the finance manager and director, I should say, finance director's stats she gave. And we're still just trying to keep above water. And right now, I'm going to tell you, we're snorkeling because we're below staff. Those are the unfilled FTEs we're trying to work on refilling. So we're below water and we're snorkeling. We've got our snorkel gear on. To cut more is difficult.
Yep. So, George, Randy, any more questions along these lines before we maybe take this conversation in a little bit different direction?
Yeah, I guess I'm just kind of curious to put a pin in the conversation about cuts specifically. I think this is a question for Brian and Maria. If the conclusion of this conversation is that sheriff's office has identified some cuts that they think they can responsibly make, and this board's direction is we'll support those cuts when they make it into the budget. Is that enough direction for you to work with the sheriff's office to get us a budget that's reflective of their comments?
It is not. I'm not hearing what the cuts are,
Those 2.5 FTEs.
The 2.5 FTE positions.
but I just heard multiple comments from board members talking about how maybe we don't want to cut those. So, I mean, if you're telling us to cut the nurse and the 1.5 and the nurse, the kitchen staff, the ranger, cut those out of the budget, then yes, that's the direction we need. But I thought I heard a couple of you say maybe we don't want to do that. So
Yeah, I'm okay with that just because it doesn't really limit our abilities to add things back if, like I said, the hiring conditions change or if any other conditions change or if the new co-responder, I don't see there to be any benefit to sort of leave something as a placeholder for a co-responder resource that we haven't even agreed to yet. I would rather tighten it up, kind of like exactly like we did with the attorney's office. And then when we have the facts at hand to add things back if needed, then we can do so.
one ranger,
Go ahead.
one ranger,
Half a nurse.
half a nurse and one kitchen.
In one kitchen.
And
You know,
to be clear, the ranger is a deputy.
Yes, it's a patrol deputy.
it's a patrol deputy we're removing is what we're doing when we do that effectively. On every one of those positions, each of us can make, or somebody can make an argument about that position. I'm in favor of having cuts. We're having cuts across the board for every single department. And the other departments have similar stories to tell us about the difficulty that they have getting the work done that they have to do, and that it affects services. When we cherry pick 2 or 3 little spots and then identify that actually this one is removing a patrol person when we say we don't want to remove them, the real bottom line is that we need to tighten our belt and find some more economical ways to get some things done. And I'm not sure that naming those 3 and then identifying that amount of money is as helpful as saying that we're going to continue to work really hard on everything from E911 to our IT and the elements of IT that pertain to the sheriff's department, just like all the other departments in the county, and that we shouldn't just pick a percentage as opposed to pick a given line item and a given person. I just want to throw that thought out there. I'm not married to any particular idea, but we're almost playing a game by picking two or three people and saying, get rid of those, while we say that we actually still need those people, but we can always add them back in later and get rid of something else. It seems like we should say, let's take out this much money and then let's go to work let's continue our work into the beginning of the year to make sure that we find those savings in those areas that we've identified that are the big ticket items.
Yeah, I mean, and we should move on to those other topics. I'm very hesitant to remove that patrol position. The other 2, if sheriff thinks it's wise, I think it's wise. I just hear way too much from our constituents about wanting to see the sheriff's office be able to respond when they call with complaints, and so I think removing any money from patrol is unwise.
That's kind of where I was at. The calls we get, I know the calls I get, we often get calls that are things that ranger will respond to, which are the shooting calls and stuff like that. And I know from talking to Rick that he doesn't actually send the ranger out into the forest onto the trails to patrol trails for those activities randomly, because he doesn't like to put them into that position. So he does more like he uses them more to respond to those kinds of complaints that we get. Shooting during a fire ban, shooting in neighborhoods, and illegal vehicle activity on those same back roads. And if it's not him, if it's not that ranger, it'll be the other person that's on duty that'll be responding.
I don't disagree with you. The only thing I would point out is I was there when the Board of County Commissioners approved that new position, and in my view, it did not live up to the hype of what problem it was supposed to solve. I don't really see that we really created a new environment of enforcement where we changed the behavior of our visitors. We spent a bunch of money on it, and we can't staff it. So I think it's something that we should reevaluate.
Yeah, and all I'm stating is it's being used as a patrol person to respond to the calls. He's not out there changing behavior in the woods. What he's doing is responding to those calls about law breaking. He's responding to one particular type of call, and more often than not, when those calls have come, when I've been around, I've seen it's been a different sheriff's deputy that responded anyway. So it's still a sheriff's deputy any way you look at it. That's all.
Right. Okay, so I don't think that's a problem today.
So I think what I would support is everything but the patrol position that was mentioned. And if there's agreement, the other members of the board on that. I know, Sean, you would like to see us get that patrol position out of there as well.
I'm just frustrated. I mean, we had this damn conversation for weeks and we're end up talking about a rounding error. It's going to make no earthly difference in our financial trajectory. So it's been a giant waste of time.
And that position has not been filled for quite some time. So you're not taking an actual person off the street. We haven't been able to fill it, so.
And there's still additional discussions to be had. Animal shelter. It's just not today.
To
You need
Sean's
to bring in
point,
municipalities and others.
to Sean's point, and I agree with him, that's why I mentioned setting a goal or setting a number that is just simply a percentage reduction, whether it's 1%, 2%, 3%, 5%, and say we've got to get this much out of the operation. And to say we can't take it out of the operation while it's coming out of everyone else's operation is not realistic. It's not responsive.
Diane, do you remember the number that came out that was kind of across the board back before Randy and I got elected? It's maybe like the first news of the mine slowdown. I think it was somewhere like 8%, or was it?
It was 10% the first year. 10% the first year and 8% the second year, I think.
How did you guys accomplish that?
We did it by increasing our revenues, upping our marshals. We did a one-time cut on all of the line item expenses, obviously not wages and benefits, but 10% down on every one of the line item expenses. And honestly, those things can be cut one time, really.
Training, uniforms.
Training, uniforms, all that stuff.
There were one-time cuts,
They were one time cutting 10% on them.
but then the money came back, and so
Nope, money never came back.
one-time cut is only.
Training's 10,000, we cut it by 10%.
It was an ongoing cut.
And it stayed.
And it stayed.
It was an ongoing cut.
You don't continue to cut the
You don't
next year.
continue to cut it. The first year we cut everything 10%. The second year we cut everything 8%. And then we've been staying the expenses that way.
Which is theoretically almost a cut in itself when everything else costs more.
Right.
And we're holding the same.
Yeah, so back to my frustration, and maybe we look at that way and say not 18% is a huge number, right? I don't think anybody here thinks that that's possible to do something like that.
No.
But and whether you come up with new revenue, I mean, I think that's kind of something that's up for discussion, but I don't know. George, what are your thoughts along those lines? I think I'm open to that kind of different way of looking at things.
I mean, I just think that we should make a percentage cut is to say we think we know that the sheriff can do with 10% less. I would much rather know specifically what we think the sheriff can do with less on. I think that's the way that we should be operating with our direct reports. I think it's the way we should be operating with our other elected offices. And I know the sheriff's office came up with a number of things that may have potential, sort of mid-year potential as defined by you. I think as of right now, if we want to remove the kitchen and the nurse position, that's an easy sell for me. If we want to include the dollars for one of those patrol positions that is vacant, okay. I'd rather see us decide not to fund a vacant detentions position than a vacant patrol position. KRW says on both that we're underfunded. And I'm more concerned with patrol. Probably that's just because what I hear from my constituents on our constituents. So I don't know. I mean, that's kind of a convoluted long answer, but I think for right now, I think we pick a number and move on. Um,
That was kind of what I was suggesting a moment ago, a percentage number, a hard number, an absolute number, something that is. If we're going to do a reduction, let's choose an amount to reduce, and then let's go back to work on the big ticket items that'll achieve the reduction.
And so we have on the table, we have 214,000, right, which is 135% of 159,000. So we could go at that number.
I'm okay with that. Does it start?
Yeah, what he's saying.
Make some progress in the right direction.
That's what I was going to ask for clarification.
Yeah, I need
Yeah,
clarification.
they're
That-
saying, I'm
I
sorry.
think the idea is, say we reduce the budget by the amount that matches those 2.5 FTEs that we talked about, but whether you guys decide to submit the budget with or without them is up to you. You can find the savings elsewhere if you want to.
200,000 off the budget is,
Yeah, so
that
that's
what you said?
2.5 FTEs plus benefits comes to 214,000.
Right.
yeah, write that down.
So that's
We're not-
what you're asking us to cut is 214,000 out of our budget,
That's what I'm hearing that you guys think you have space for.
right?
An ongoing cut. Meaning it doesn't come back.
Right.
Or if it does come back, it comes back through a process.
Correct.
Will it have to be with co-responder or increased revenue and asking for assistance on that?
So we all leave the room understanding it's 214, and then how you choose to administer your budget is up to you and what you do day to day, and you're the best to know about that, not us. But it's just 214,000.
So you got that 214?
Okay, thanks. So
To
then,
any statistics nerds out there, that's 2.4%.
okay. So not nothing, not 18%, but not nothing. So thank you for that presentation. I wanted to circle back, like I said, switch gears a little bit, talk a little bit about the longer term, and we don't need to talk about this for a long time, but I like the idea of the conversation around the animal shelter, and I would much rather see, for example, the $150,000 that hasn't been spent yet or identified, potentially applied toward capital improvements to the animal shelter. I mean, I'm open to whatever that negotiation, however that unfolds. Personally, I think it would probably be easiest and simplest and the lowest risk if we go down that path to not retain ownership of that property and to completely divest ourselves of any sort of long-term financial responsibility. So I think as a first step, it might make sense to basically put the $150,000 of extra toilet money or shower money, whatever we're calling that, on hold until we get more information.
Sean, I think
don't
you're
know, George.
confusing two issues there, Sean. So the 150 is the remaining in the jail. You mentioned the animal shelter.
I'm not
We were-
confusing them. I'm basically responding to Under Sheriff Stein's point that we may need to come up with some capital improvements before we can dispose of that property properly. And I think ARPA money is, in my mind, a perfect potential place for that to happen because it's spending one-time money to eliminate the ongoing financial liability.
Okay, the current proposed budget does not include any money
This is
currently.
ARPA money, so it's outside of the scope of this. We're just talking about longer term things.
Right, but there was no ARPA money associated with any kind of work at the animal shelter.
I know that.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's saying, let's take the 150 jail repair ARPA money that's left. Let's not spend it on the jail. Let's focus it on the animal shelter.
We need
Give ourselves some options moving forward on the animal shelter.
We're just potentially kind of keeping in mind for that.
I still have to have a jail, a functioning jail, toilets in the jail,
Yeah.
and showers that need to be replaced before somebody falls through them because they are over 40 years old. I would have to disagree with that idea of, maybe,
leftovers from it or something
yeah,
after the
maybe
jail.
leftovers.
Because we
after
will
the
have
jail.
less, but
Right, but,
Yeah. I'm okay.
Right.
Like I said, we don't have to solve this today, but
Yeah.
one of the
right,
other
I still
things-
have to have a jail.
one of the other things I think that is in your court is helping recover the plumbing deposit for the unnamed vendor who I will be happy to name soon if we need to, who hasn't returned us and didn't do the work they promised.
And and that's something that Peter and I are gonna have to work out because it's gonna take an attorney to get that money back, I think.
So staying on the ARPA funded jail repair projects, Sean, I think I agree with your general point that I think what happened was we authorized $200,000, $50,000 was spent on the scope of the project that was defined to us when we authorized the 200,000. And now there's more that can be done, and there's a need. I'm not trying to deny the need. What I would like to see is us not budget for it until we see a detailed accounting of it.
Yes.
I agree. I'm working on
Yeah.
that. George.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's, if others agree and sheriff's okay with that, I think that might be how we proceed with that. And Sean, you raise a good point that, dollars are fungible, and we might think about other uses for that to address sheriff's capital needs in other parts of his operation.
I prefer to see, and I also prefer to see the reductions made now with the idea that when cause is shown and proven, if we put the money in the budget, then it's there to be used however it gets used. And if we recognize there's questions about some of those expenditures, then to wait to receive that information. If necessary, we can do supplemental appropriations when the time comes.
Yeah. So I think, sorry.
Okay, anything else, George, Randy?
I want to make sure we're clear on that. So no ARPA expenditures in the jail before they come to the board.
No, I'm hearing animal shelter.
Either one.
Yeah, either one.
Either one.
It's the 150 that remains from the 200 ARPA funds. Don't spend any more of it.
Okay.
And
Without-
it won't be budgeted right now for 2023. It will not be budgeted. And when you guys have your spending plan together and your scope defined and ready to share it with the board, you come back to the board, explain it all, and then they can do a supplemental appropriation for the 150,000 if they choose to move forward.
Yeah. And isn't what I think even if there's even things that are budgeted, expenditures over $100,000 require a board
Yes.
approval, correct?
Yes, they do. Anything over $50,000 needs my signature.
Yeah.
Is this for next year or completion of this year? Because I think the plumber's coming in Saturday
I think so.
to do some more work.
And that's where I was thinking it's animal shelter, since we've already had this discussion. It's ARPA's outside of the budget. We're just trying to finish the repairs that were previously approved, and we're reducing some of that cost by not replacing toilet fixture, just the parts. But we've got people scheduled and coming out and actively working on this.
My understanding was that you spent $50,000 and completed the repairs that were described when we authorized 200,000. Is that correct?
No,
No,
That's what you explained previously.
we've done some repairs and ordered the parts for inside the toilets. They still have to be installed, and we still have to finish some showers. It will be less than the 200,000. And that's what's in the PowerPoint presentation. We don't
It's
have
when
the
you
final
say-
dollar amount yet.
Maria, do you have Springbrook open?
It's when you say showers, John,
Yes,
that I know that you're talking about spending money for projects that weren't described to us, because we didn't hear the word showers when we authorized that $200,000.
that's correct.
okay.
So that's where, if you've got a plumber coming in on Saturday, I'm not going to tell you to call him and tell him not to come.
Thank you.
I don't think you're going to spend $150,000 on Saturday. How much are you
No.
gonna spend on Saturday?
I'm sorry, I missed that last part, George.
So how much are you going to spend on Saturday?
I don't know what he has planned. I know that the captain down there told me that he is coming in, I think, Saturday to do some more work.
So then,
So
can
we won't complete the showers then. We'll make a whole new proposal on the showers. But the toilets, and that's changed too, because we're not replacing the toilets. You guys been down there. It's a toilet and a sink. It's the internals that we're replacing, because those are stainless steel. They're not gonna go anywhere. They're not damaged beyond repair. It's the internal workings. So that changed in the original
Paid him so.
$200,000, that we're not gonna take and replace the toilets. It's just the internals.
okay, so can we do this then? Does it,
Which
I'm trying to think about how the board can issue some direction for us to move forward.
You recognize that 15 needs my approval, right?
And I'm just gonna let you guys wrap up that conversation.
Never seen before.
So
Folks, there's a lot of background noise. Diane, Maria,
oh, I'm sorry, sir.
yeah, it's picking up. So George was in the middle of a statement. I just don't want everybody to talk over one another.
Oh, okay, sorry,
It's
Commissioners.
okay. I mean, if you guys have some details you need to work out, we can wait.
Do we need to take a 5-minute break?
No.
No, I don't.
Okay, so I think what I heard from you, George, is you just want to make sure that we're not going to burn through the 150 grand on stuff that we hadn't really talked about. So who knows whether this weekend is a $5 grand thing or something like that. But my take on it is that we need to keep in communication between our teams, especially our financial teams, and just make sure that we don't make sure that we don't get too far ahead of this one. I mean, I agree with you, Sheriff. You need to have a functional jail. And I remember seeing the shower that was particularly in bad shape, that was kind of across from where the officers hang out. You kind of showed us the backside of it through that broom closet. So I know what you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, I had a leak on it.
I promise you, I will not go crazy. I mean, I think it's gonna be one of those $5,000 to $7,000 weekends. It's not gonna be 10 to 20,000. I think, I don't want to assume anything, but I think it's the parts he's ordered, he's gonna come in and replace them.
Okay.
So
So
it's not a big budget item.
Okay. Is it reasonable then to say that we remove from the budget whatever's, left unspent after this scheduled visit? Or are you asking, Sheriff, that we just leave it in the budget and you don't spend any of the money until we have the broader conversation?
It's up to you guys. I'd like to have the money in there, but I know money's tight and I don't have a problem with it. And I agree on the showers. We will make a new proposal on that. But the toilets, we do need to replace all the internals on the plumbing down there to have a functional jail.
So which of those two options, Randy, Sean, do you like? Do we ask staff to pull out of the budget whatever is left after this weekend, or do we leave it in the budget and just ask the sheriff to come back to us before he spends any more money after this weekend?
I'm fine with the latter. I mean, I don't think we need to get our noses too deep into this.
Okay, I'm good with that too, Randy.
Yeah, me too. I like the way Sean started to describe that.
Okay, awesome. So then I know the other topic. Well, Sean, you
Where are we at on that, Brian?
Which piece?
The toilets and stuff
They're keeping it's in the budget.
in the budget.
Keep with
All
the
right.
toilets, not
All
shower.
right. Thanks. I missed that part.
Yeah, and my understanding, Sheriff, is you're gonna have this work done for these parts that were already ordered. You don't have other parts on order, and then we're gonna have a larger conversation about what those repairs are, how they augment the functionality of the jail. Obviously, that relates to the federal inmate program and that whole conversation, which is why we're trying to punt.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple of other things related to 911. One of them I think George brought up, which was kind of standardizing how we treat the other funds outside of the general fund. And I think we verified through Pete that those 911 funds could be paid for salaries, because it seems like they've been treated a little bit uniquely as almost like a capital fund for a specific function in the county. And I believe our preference would be to align the capital requests coming out of that, have them line up alongside of all the other capital requests in the county, and make a fund transfer from the 911 fund into the general fund to give us some relief on the general fund and help pay for, some of the salaries in that department. Is that fairly said, Pete and George and Randy?
That's accurate. And the number that I think was reported from Diane about projects that haven't been committed is 226,000 for this year. Obviously, we don't want to pull money out for projects that have already been committed. So I think what that would result in is that the budget show a transfer from E911 into general fund to cover salaries and wages of $226,000. And then those capital projects can go into that are not being funded, can get into the mix with the rest of the capital needs for the entire organization.
That's something that I don't think I can agree with. It's the cab issue. It's not just the sheriff's issue. we formed the CAB, which is the Communication Advisory Board, and they are the ones that make the decisions on funding, I believe, and how it's spent. I don't think I, as sheriff alone, can do that.
There's
I think those
members.
are county dollars, not cab dollars, though.
Yes. County money,
It's
From
911
811?
surcharge money,
correct.
Right.
Counties.
which is separate from general fund, which is governed by the CAB,
It's
not the sheriff.
governed by the BOCC. But
Governed by the board.
yeah, by the
Yeah, I don't think the
directors.
cab has any statutory or legal authority to do anything with respect to these dollars.
And I read through that and I know the CAB recommends your communications budget, right? And they recommend to you and then of course you recommend to us. But as far as those capital projects that the E911 fund has been paying for, I don't see any reason why they would be treated differently than a capital project, like acknowledging that we have staff that doesn't have adequate emergency egress out of the buildings they work in. I don't know what those projects are in the E911 fund. I saw a communications floor replacement. I haven't been up there to know how important that is. I just know that.
The floor is caving in, is what it is. And because it's the 911 Authority Board is also the CAB board.
The 911 Authority Board.
I'll let the attorney answer, but the 911 Authority Board are the commissioners. They're the
Right.
directors. The CAB is just an advisory
Correct.
group. The 911 Authority Board is these three commissioners.
So I think maybe we need to do a little bit more investigation, and also there's some other decisions being made by CAB participants that are going to be relevant to this conversation too. So maybe we should sort of pause on this conversation from now until then, and at least note the fact that we're not going to be spending any of those capital dollars, or the BOCC is not going to be approving any of those dollars out of the 911 fund to be spent on the capital projects until we have these further discussions. Does that sound fair to you, George and Randy?
So let me make sure I'm understanding sort of in terms of budget mechanics. What you're saying is we don't transfer money from the E911 fund to the general fund for salaries and wages, but we reduce the budget for the E911 fund to include only those capital projects that have already been committed.
I think that sounds reasonable. I think that's kind of a functionally equivalent to what I was thinking.
So there's a relationship to those capital projects that have technically been committed and the other conversation about IT dollars.
Yes.
Yeah,
Some of that money has been committed, but we've been asking for the agreements. We can't get copies of the agreements. So
Let's get them.
it's all tied together.
Let's get them, and then let's be on that, on both the IT and the, on all those projects, including the 911 stuff.
I think the safe way would be is we just don't budget for any capital coming out of E911 until those get brought forward to all of you.
mhm. Yeah, I think that sounds reasonable. And since they are related, let's bring up what I think is the last major topic. And Sheriff, you and I talked about this briefly offline a few days ago. We've been doing more studying about our IT budget in general. And at CCI, I noticed Park County's budget was drastically less than ours, their overall IT budget. And they had their IT shop under one roof. So essentially they didn't have separate contracts between the different departments inside of their shop. So we're not going to have a resolution about this today, but just wanted to kind of mention publicly that we are going to be putting IT under a microscope to make sure that we're getting the right value and that we're solving the right problems and not over solving problems or paying for things that we don't need. And I think it would make a ton of sense for us to do that on a more holistic basis. And we're also have been talking about potentially hiring John Bottomley's replacement to be able to have more of this in-house. Park County, for example, has 3 full-time employees. They do not make very much use of contractors at all. And I'm not saying that's the direction we need to head in. I'm just saying it's our fiduciary responsibility to look and see how other counties are solving this problem and seeing and making sure that we're getting the right value for this. So kind of back to Brian's point, we're going to need to be looking at that pretty closely in the new year. I don't know that it necessarily has any budget impacts immediately, other than the last thing that we're going to talk about, which is the firewall when we're done with this conversation.
I think the thing maybe I'm not understanding is we could decide, and this would impact the budget, not the top line number, but it would move dollars around within departments, to take all of the IT dollars spent in any department and put them into an IT department.
Oh, I do. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. I agree with that.
Correct.
Who would have control over this person?
Me. Report to me.
That would be unacceptable because there's confidential stuff that we have in our dispatch center, in our patrol cars.
It works in cities.
That
Someone help me understand why it doesn't work in counties.
Brian having access to.
FBI rules with CJIS requires that their background fingerprint check. There's all these other things that we have to go through. And for us to be able to do that, we'd need them in-house or contracted through for our control.
Works in cities.
I'm
Yeah.
Work in counties too.
And with all due respect, no one on this call has the knowledge or the skills or the track record to appropriately oversee that function. And our way out of control costs are reflective of that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that, we did it like this until 2016 or 2017. The former sheriff at some point got frustrated with what he perceived as poor service from the IT director at the time. I have confidence that we can do this and not replicate that issue, because
That's not what it was.
we have an excellent county manager that has made some excellent hires, and we can make an excellent hire here too. Get an IT director that can serve all of our needs. And I certainly, just like sheriff, we hire a county attorney and a finance director that has obligations to you, and we hold them to meeting those obligations to you. I think we could perform that with an IT director as well. The IT director would be under direction to meet your needs.
George, I just want to make clear, the previous the sheriff's office, for the 17 years I've been here, we've always had our own IT company. The company before the one we have now, we had a big disagreement with him. His company put our firewall at risk in 2017 or 18, and that's why we got rid of him. That's why we severed our contract with him. So it had nothing to do with the county's IT director. And in fact, that company, the previous company before Axiom, which we're using now, which we have total faith in, 100% trust, the company before him was the one that was damaging the relationship with the county finance director, or the county IT director. So I think your information got a little misinformed there.
Was I heard a narrative that isn't quite accurate, that at one point our IT director managed your systems?
No.
Back to Mary Johnson, yes.
Yes, at one point Mary Johnson managed your, okay. Okay, so I mean, I think
That was
we
before
can do this
17
again.
years ago.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Sheriff, I know statute says we give you a budget, you figure out how to hire your deputies and do your law enforcement. And that's because you're an expert in that and I'm not. IT feels like a different topic to me. I don't think there's anything unique to a sheriff or a county commissioner or a road and bridge director that says that you don't just need someone that knows IT. And I think, like you've said, we're one family, and we can meet our IT needs together and maybe spend something less than $2 million a year on it.
I think it only makes sense that economics of scale under one management plan is something that almost any business would do if they were trying to save money and make more.
And I don't think there's any, you're a key user of that service, and your input and direction would be instrumental. But having two different very expensive shops under the same roof is where the problem really starts for me.
One of the things, just kind of building on this, I think I don't think there's much out here that makes me think that this isn't the way to move. I could see an option where here's what I'm struggling with. I'm struggling with the logistics of, okay, we approve a budget in 6 days that has all of the IT dollars in one department. what does that do to the current operation of our IT stuff? And do we need to think more about, okay, well, the Board of County Commissioners has been very, obviously thinks we need to go in this direction. And do we figure out how to go in this direction in Q1 next year and make a supplemental appropriation then? Is that, am I offering a bad option?
Well, nothing would change until we hired staff, right? So the Axiom contract on both sides of the house would remain until we bring somebody on in-house to be a director or a chief information officer. At that point, you would still need Axiom on board for a while for a transitionary piece to educate the internal staff that we're going to be hiring. So for the time being, nothing is going to change other than the fact of where the money's housed and who's responsible for the contract.
Yeah, and just I'd like to go on record. I don't disparage Axiom at all. I think that they've been under improper supervision, and I think that's our fault. And that happened when John Bottomley left the office, along with most of the organizational's IT knowledge.
Yeah, that's fair. So, okay, so Brian, what you're saying is we could make this change to the budget. The only functional change would be that, I guess under your authority, Axiom would continue to operate as they are for the sheriff's office and us until such time as we hire an IT director and start to change how things go.
Correct.
And with that's not even, I'm making an assumption that I shouldn't even be making, which is that would result in us not using Axiom.
Right. The bottom line is we need to maintain continuous function. And we've got a system now but we need to change the dynamic if we're spending 2 to 4 times as much as counties of the same size to get the same job done. So we need to make sure we're comparing apples and apples and then find out what the differences are and how they're operating.
For what it's worth, Park County has twice as many people as we do.
Yeah.
And also for what it's worth, we got a staff member sitting in this room right now that spent a lot of time getting to know IT and oversee Axiom. So I don't want to forget that.
No, definitely not. And not trying to disparage anyone. I mean, I haven't gone to school for IT stuff either. So, you know,
I think we're getting into nuts and bolts.
Yeah.
Sorry to interject, but there's just different types of systems that we have to make sure we're all sitting at the table to discuss, because certain firewalls have to be separate for our CGIS records. Anyone that touches it has to be vetted and background checked, fingerprinted, and no one else could have access to it. So we couldn't have on the same server, say, clerk and recorder versus sheriff. So we just need to all be sitting and have this conversation a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, I think I mean, again, these are problems that the other 59 Colorado counties have figured out too. So I'm sure that we can do it. I think those were sort of the larger ticket items that I had in mind, kind of listening to your presentation under Sheriff Stein. George, Randy, staff, did you have anything else?
Well, just to be clear, so we're going to sweep up all the IT money out of the sheriff's office. I think I would have Maria work with Diane on what those particular line items are.
Not at this time
Not at
until
this time, no.
y'all finish a project. That
I'm hearing direction from the board to move that money.
I think so. I mean, it's
Yeah.
essentially, it's an accounting move, right? We're moving it from one part of the budget
Correct.
to another, and we're not functionally changing anything right now.
okay.
Right, we're moving the money out of the sheriff's office budget and
Patrick would still be underneath me.
You're just paying the bills then.
No, it's not
no.
the sheriff budget at all. Those line items are moved out completely.
So
But the
Patrick would still take direction from me.
I think that this board for this period of time where we're figuring out this transition, there should be an additional set of direction that the county manager, basically do what the sheriff wants to do with regards to the management of that IT system until we have an IT director in place per the plan.
But another way of saying that maybe is, I mean, there's a direct contract and it's a different contract, and the different contract that the sheriff's office is managing separately, that nothing would change from in terms of reporting structures. We're not going to interject ourselves in that chain of command at this point in time. We're basically just making an accounting change and setting the table
Don't do it.
for reaching efficiencies
I don't
down
have a
the road.
choice.
unless we're authorizing the expenditure of funds, and then I need to know about that before it gets authorized.
So that would be the only change, is like if there was a new contract.
Correct. If there's some new authorization of IT expense, I need to be aware of that before it happens.
Whether it's a new contract or an extension or a change order to an old contract or just direct direction to do something, the bottom line, if the money's being spent, our county manager needs to know. He needs to be in the game.
Before it's authorized.
Any changes to the current agreement that we have?
Well, for instance, multi-factor identification. He's charging you a fee to install that, right? And so when he says, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do that, if that's what's going to happen, I need to know that we're authorizing that expense before it gets authorized.
If it's over 50,000, I thought I heard that earlier. You want 100%, it doesn't matter.
100%.
Sheriff, don't move the IT right now until they have an IT director and they have an actual plan of what they're doing with their IT. Because they don't have a plan right now. In fact, they're trying to get rid of they have David right now, who's the only IT guy showing up every day. He can't handle all of that, nor should you
I'm sorry.
expect him to.
Hey, with all due respect, Diane, this is over your.
All due respect to you too, Sean, I don't believe you should make that change right now.
Putting
When you
words
get your
and
IT
ideas in our-
side together on
putting
that
words in our
end, then
mouths
yes,
and
then
ideas in our
perhaps we can
heads.
talk about it.
We're putting words in our mouths that we did not say. And
Nope, you
ideas
guys
in our
just said
heads
it right
we did
now, that you
not
want to
think.
change all those funds to go right over there. Back over to the county and Brian's in charge of all of that. And if that's the way, I don't think that should happen in 2023. I don't think that should happen ever. But if after 2023, that's how it's decided that it's going to go, fine, but not changing it now. We have too much invested with Axiom, who we have absolute trust in, who knows every piece of our system. I don't want to put that under the county's authority right now and making sure that Brian's signature is on everything. We have run our IT department in the sheriff's office fantastic since Axiom has stepped in and been our IT director. And I will never, not my decision, but I just don't think in 2023 you should change that right now.
May I interject?
Sure.
And so first of all, you may have entered into an agreement with Axiom, but you didn't actually follow the county's purchasing policy and guidelines when you did so. Somehow you entered into an agreement with Axiom without actually following any guidelines as required by the county to use and expend county general fund dollars that are assigned to the sheriff's office. So let me first make that point. Additionally, so that we are clear in our roles here, while we appreciate the comments that you have made, at the end of the day, what you want is not the decision that gets to be made. The decision is made by the Board of County Commissioners. The decision is made by the Board of County Commissioners as to how the budget is apportioned. So the board can do what it wants here. And so while I think it's important that you absolutely state what you want, at the end of the day, it's the board's call.
Mm-hmm. And let me just say that my point a little bit ago is that we haven't made it. We aren't sitting here without a clue, without a plan, without any idea of anything to do except for one. And it's that during a time of declining revenues for all of us, we have to find a way to make the lines cross. That's number one. Secondly, when we happen to look at IT, we happen to note that other counties of the same scale or larger, 4 times the land mass, twice the population, are accomplishing the same thing for half the money. And we're saying, and so we're not even saying, I'm not saying get rid of Axiom. I'm saying there's something wrong with this picture and we need to find out what's wrong with the picture and fix it so that we're spending at a scale that makes sense for our county. And so just to say we're going to keep doing the same thing because we have ultimate trust in them is to say we're going to keep spending way more money than other counties are spending to get the same amount done when they're bigger counties than we are. And so it could be with Axiom, but it could be restructured. It could be that the services come a completely different way. I don't know what it's going to look like because although I did learn to program in 3 different languages, I decided I didn't want to be an IT guy when I grew up. So that was a long, long time ago. George and Sean are way closer to that end of the scale than I am at this point in time. But I do know this, I've had to look at numbers for a long time, and the numbers we're looking at for all of the IT in this county are out of range. And I think everyone, including Axiom and including the people that we have working for us, want to make sure that we get that under control so we can be proud of it. Be proud that we're providing fiduciary responsibility to our taxpayers.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the plan, we've seen the plan work in other areas of our organization. The plan is to make a good hire and get and authorize that person to make a difference, right? And we only do that by making this change that we're talking about, and that's why I'm in support of it. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to build some trust, because what we'll have is we'll have a period of time where we have sort of the IT system that we have today under a different authority. And I would be concerned too that, geez, am I going to go and try to have an expenditure and be frustrated that I don't get what I need, or, you know, am I going to be messed with by the county manager in this process? And this is why I'm framing this as an opportunity to build some trust, because I don't think the county manager will mess with you. I think he's under direction to act in good faith with people, like a professional, and I think he'll get some direction. And my dog agrees. So that's why I'm in support of this.
And there's no change. I mean, basically, we'd be running off the numbers that the sheriff's office put in their 2023 budget. We would just be consolidating along with the rest of the IT numbers. So I guess I'm a little bit confused at why there's such pushback or concern about that.
Yeah, we have no intent to compromise the integrity of the security of the privacy of a lot of the information that you do need to protect too. That obviously we can't get the job done without you helping us make sure that none of that happens.
So just interjecting. Apologies. It's just little things like the CJIS, the end of life. CJIS doesn't allow for anything past end of life. There's certain computer system operating systems right now that can't even be utilized because it's past that. So those are expenses that we're, on the other side, you might be able to have a different patch. Other conversations you guys have had with IT that might be acceptable. On our end, it's not. It makes us a little bit more expensive, a lot more needy. It's to protect not only liability, civil and criminal, from FBI and CBI CJIS records, but the entire organization. That's why we're truly concerned.
Again, that's a problem that's been solved in many other counties, and we're going to figure out how they did it.
Yeah. We'll hire somebody that can manage.
Any
it.
chance of pulling those funds out are going to cover our 214,000 cut you want then? Got to ask.
Well, the general fund.
There's
still
no
has to
cut.
pay it,
Yeah,
right?
there's no
It's not
cut.
You're just pulling it.
We're just moving money from one account to another. There's no
So-
cut.
I was hoping it would cover that 214 then.
It's a totally different conversation.
Worth
I'm
asking.
gonna do the same point.
Randy, is there anything else that we need to cover with the sheriff's office before we move on to our last item for the day? Okay, well, again, thank you for the spirit of partnership. I know that you seem to be a little bit frustrated, and I understand that, but we are one team, and we're going to have to close ranks and work together to close the budget gap. And like George said, or Randy said, make the lines cross. That's our fiduciary responsibility. I know you guys like to talk about the special fiduciary or special statutory responsibilities that you have, and we're a team and we have responsibilities too. And there are things that are not optional. So anything that you want to add? I see Brian has his hand up.
Yeah, I just want to recap, just make sure we're all on the same page based on what we've done. So we're cutting $214,000 out of the sheriff's office budget. Where they take that is up to them. No capital in E911. We're transferring all IT funds out of the sheriff's office and into the IT budget. And I will have Maria confirm with Diane what those line items are. Get it all?
That's right.
Yeah, that's what I.
Add my note details. We're going to finish the toilets that is already being worked
Yes.
on.
Yeah.
Showers will be separate. We'll do a proposal.
We'll roll.
Trying to show we're all on the same page.
Balance
And
of
I
those
just-
ARPA funds.
Just a little bit of commentary on the E911 fund.
City Hall.
We're doing this year what we're doing. That E911 fund is going to build some balance there for this year. I think that those revenues should go to salaries and benefits before they go to capital. And I think capital projects associated with communications should get into the line. I don't anticipate changing my mind on that for next year's budget. So I just want everyone to know.
Anything final from you, George?
I will mention, because I mentioned a vacancy in the assessor's office as well. We got an email from Diane Settle talking about that vacancy. I think I'm satisfied that this isn't the time to try to ask them to do with less as they're bringing in a new assessor. Do you guys agree with that?
For the time being, right?
I was very tempted to ask them to try to do without for 6 months and see how it goes, but it's an important function.
Sheriff, Under Sheriff, Diane, anything final from you guys before we move on?
Nope.
Okay, thanks again. I think we only have one more topic, and it's the infamous firewall.
Do I need to stay for this?
You don't need to, but you can if you want.
It's firewall on this side.
The firewall on this side of the building?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't care about it. As long as it doesn't affect us.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Have a good one.
All right. I think where we last left it was we had asked IT to do some homework and find out what choices we have and maybe make a more informed decision in the new year. And I think technically what we need to do now is decide whether or not it stays in the budget. And then my understanding was we can leave it in the budget and still have the opportunity to do something potentially more efficient next year, which is kind of where I'm leaning. But with that said, Beth, Brian, is there anything I missed?
I'll let Beth cover the answers to the questions that got posed at the last meeting. I don't, as it stands right now, it's not in the budget,
Correct.
right? So you would have, we're looking for direction to include it in the budget. Even if it doesn't get immediately spent until it comes back to you later. But again, I'll let Beth cover some of the questions that you had posed during the last meeting.
Which is that document right there, sorry. I did email you all today. Sean had sent in some questions from the last meeting about the firewall system and adjusting sizes and capabilities of, what the equipment can do. The other thing I think you wanted to know was, can we do an extended warranty? We did get a number for you on that. I did include that in your packet. Also, just as a side note, I do have the Fortinet folks here to answer any questions about size and standard of what can be used and what can, stay on a warranty and what can't. So on your packet, I submitted the 2023 regular capital request. Our firewall is end of life. It expires in February of 2023. Our request is for the 2 main firewalls at the courthouse and the 10 smaller units at our remote sites. That total was $107,220. We did get option A, which is the extended warranty on all the units, which is $50,000. That's for 1 year. And I'm probably going to misspeak, so that's why I have Fortinet on the call. It does not include all the code configurations, and I don't know if Jordan or anybody wants to jump on that one.
I'll just say, you have some bravado to throw out a number like that. I'd be embarrassed to quote $50,000 for 1 year support. That's ridiculous.
That's for 15 products.
I understand.
Okay. Option B was to replace the 2 main firewalls and do the support for 10 remote sites. That one is $90,500. Again, this is the warranty of only 1 year on the remote sites. Let's see, option C, replace the 2 main firewalls and downsize the remote sites to the 40F. And I put some responses in there for you about why the 40F wouldn't really work. And that price came out to $82,000. So I don't know if you want to share more.
Yes, well, we asked the Fortinet techs to compare what our existing firewalls are versus this lower end one, if we put it at all of our remote sites, and they came back with these the details that Beth has put in there, which the cross traffic, the internet in and out, all of these features are key points for the functionality. Initially, it was observed that we are using overkill products, and that is not the case, because even though the sheriff just left, the firewall does support the sheriff, and it supports the county on both sides. So they are included in this, and the traffic between between all of our remote sites including sheriff offsites, is all built into this firewall as rules and policies that took a whole year to program. Come to find out that they worked at this in designing this and working with Fortinet tech support in building this devices up. So it's very much justified for the cost that our county, that it's not overkill for our county.
Sean, so to be fair, that quote came from our vendor, right? I mean, that you
Right.
asked us to go out
My
and get.
statement was toward the vendor, not towards our team.
Your point, Brian.
Well, I was just making Sean just made it for me. I mean, my point was that was our, we were responding to the question that came in the last meeting, which was find out what it would cost to extend the warranty. And that's what we did.
Right. My point was, saying we'll give you the brand new Lamborghini that for 3 years for 100,000, or we'll give you the old one that you don't want anymore for 1 year for half that price. I mean, that just seems like a non-offer.
So the board has before basically today, it doesn't have to consider any of those options at this moment. Of course, that would be presented at a later time whenever it's further evaluated by staff. My understanding is that what we're looking for is just to determine what the appropriate budget here is for. Brian, am I correct that what we'd like to do, or staff recommends, is to incorporate a budget that might account for the most expensive option, knowing, of course, that it's still going to come back before the board and be determined as to what option we move forward with?
I think the staff presented to you is recommending that we make this purchase. I think at a minimum, we need to at least get direction from you to budget it in the 23 budget so they can go back out and come back to you to either justify this purchase or recommend something else.
And I do want to remind everybody, we do have an 8-week lead time on this equipment. So our firewall expires in February. So I want to remind you of these pieces that are all.
So that's why one of our best options on this A, B, and C was B, because it was replacing the main firewalls that are going to expire in February, but there's not that much of a lead time on them. But then getting an extended warranty for the 10 remote site firewalls. And so that's what seemed more logical about it, because replacing those remote site firewalls, there's a 6 to 8 month back order on them because of the industry and capacitors and chips and availability.
So that, to make sure I understand that option, that is a 1-year warranty on those 10 remote firewalls, full replacement of the 2 main firewalls with the 3-year warranty.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, it's for the purposes of a budgeting conversation, I think I agree with staff that we should budget something that allows for all of these options. Sean has made, I think, some really good points, and he's piqued my curiosity, and I want to give runway for us to satisfy his concerns and his desire to dig into this. And I think that's how we accommodate that. I think that's how we accomplish that.
And it's my understanding here that staff, and I'm seeing the staff I'm seeing on screen right now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm trying not to count Brian twice. He's kind of all over the place here, but a couple different screens anyway. That staff is pretty unanimous that this is the best option, and that's why you're recommending it at this time. But you're also committing to satisfy Sean's request to go out and look for a more cost-effective option before we spend the money. Is that correct?
Well, I'm hearing Sean tell us that we have not justified the need for this level of a firewall, is what he's saying, that we're overbuying and that we have not justified this yet. And so I think I need to work with our team to figure out how we better justify this purchase or bring back a different recommendation, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, thank you.
The thing that really piques my curiosity is exactly that. It's hearing that this firewall is sufficient to manage a network of a government the size of Denver. Is there another firewall product that is sufficient for our needs at having a staff of 250? Right. And that's the line of questioning I hear Sean answered. And I haven't heard a very satisfactory answer either, in that, maybe it's because the technical jargon is my eyes have glazed over as I've tried to get through it. But are there other, are we buying the enterprise level model when there's a lower model that we can go with?
We did look into that, and it was one of Sean's recommendation, and he suggested a particular model under this same name brand, and we spoke with the technicians about that. And the redundancy and the battery source, we have it in the key points here that Beth sent in the highlighted, that we would be selling ourselves short by going to a lesser model, that it's not just for the county, it includes the sheriff's office.
And I saw that, and my analogy is it's like buying an extremely expensive insurance policy for something that's very unlikely to happen. I found that there are plenty of enterprise shops that don't host dual redundant hardware and double the costs of ownership, but rather have a service contract to be able to have a fix within a half a day or something like that. If it happens to go down, which, I haven't talked to anybody in industry who's actually had one of their enterprise firewalls have a hardware failure like that. Of course, I'm sure that they do happen, but that's my concern, is that I understand what our staff is doing and what our vendors doing, and I think they're looking at it purely through the lens of taking the technical capability and providing an extremely robust solution. I'm looking at through another lens is, what can we afford, right? Can we afford to double our costs to insure ourselves against an event which we could probably manage if it's in the highly unlikely event that it actually happens? And I don't have an answer for that.
I don't either. And maybe, go ahead, Dave.
Oh, what we have in place now is what the previous IT director did put in place. They worked for over a year to build this up in this status that it is. And it's just that we have till October of 2024, and that is no longer going to be supported at all. So if we did extend and go with the $50,000 to upgrade the warranty for all of the devices, that we can only get 1 year out of those two main firewalls. And so what the key thing is that the time and effort that went in with rebuilding and building that firewall up to what it is doing with the sheriff's tunnels and the VPN support with all the people that do work remotely day in and day out, that is all built into the firewall. It also supports the Wi-Fi security and a lot of features like that, that mostly a lot of the security comes from the sheriff's side, but it is a lot on the county as well. So it is kind of a even split, maybe 60-40, but there's a lot of time and effort that went into building that. Going with a different name brand and a whole different product line would be a huge undertaking.
And so
to
that would
rebuild
be the
that.
kind of thing that you would do if you felt like there was significant long run savings. I don't know, Sean, the thing I heard you say that I agree with is that $50,000 for a 1 year warranty feels like a non-offer to me too. It feels like a price you put on so someone doesn't select that option. Yeah. And it makes me feel like the next step is for us to talk to other vendors. I know this vendor is here in the room and maybe they want to respond to that. But
yeah, absolutely. And I think you guys can hear me now. And sorry, I've been running around, got a carriage ride with the son here shortly. So, but anyway, I wanted to jump in and add to that. So that 50,000 was actually to add the switches as well. So that was the reason for the additional cost, which the switches aren't a part of the refresh with the firewalls that we're proposing. So the reason that the switches were included was just a number of quotes going back and forth. And typically for core switches, you'll want support on those. I know that David and I had the conversation earlier this week. Hey, we're going to take those core switches off. And so I know that number was drastically reduced coming out of that conversation. So it wouldn't be that 50K number that we had discussed. It would be much lower. And again, I don't want to give that. I know that David and Beth have those numbers available. And if they don't on hand, can send those to you afterwards. But I did want to address that 50K number. It's not a tactic to get you guys to accelerate or refresh. I also wanted to address, the size of the firewall, right? The 601F, I would say, is very comparable to a county, a city. There are towns, up near you guys that are using comparably sized firewalls as well. So this isn't something where we are, in my mind, would be selling an enterprise. Our enterprise level really starts, I would say, 1800 series and up. And, very familiar with the city and county of Denver, the airport, some of our larger universities. And that's typically where we're selling those 2600s and up and those enterprise type customers. But and one of the other things that I know David mentioned, the reason we're looking at the 601F when you guys look at your internet connections is we are looking at not just the north-south traffic, but we're looking at east-west for what you guys have there internally, as well as he mentioned with the sheriff's office. So a lot of times we're having to handle those connections and those handoffs internally across the land.
Right, but I mean, we're not doing crypto mining or any super computer intensive stuff, right? We have some fairly basic systems here. So
agreed.
Again, I think Jordan, through another lens too, which is, there are 60 counties in Colorado. More than half the counties, 2/3 of the counties, maybe 3/4 of the counties can't afford something like this. So how do you serve counties like that? Do you tell them, hey, go to our competitor, or good luck, go to an open source solution? I mean, that's the lens I'm looking at this through too, which is we just can't afford to be paying this amount of money for IT services. And the firewall is kind of the first thing that came before us in this new spirit of scrutiny and austerity, if you want to call it that. So yeah, how do you respond to counties who have less money or who can't afford?
Typically, I would say that we actually fall, more as actually a reasonably priced product. I mean, when you look at what the enterprise space have the biggest competitors, you're going to see the Palo Alto and the Cisco. And those are really going to be the enterprise level customers that are going to be paying enterprise level prices. When you look at Fortinet, one of the things that we're actually very well known for is our pricing and actually having fair pricing across the board. I mean, that's within the industry, that is something that's commonly known. I mean, you can do research, look across different, user groups, Gartner, and what they're saying about us. And a lot of that comes down to our custom built ASICs that we have inside of our hardware. So it's not one of those, we're trying to oversize or anything like that. We're sizing to, the appropriate offering. And at the end of the day, I mean, when you look at the firewall space, I mean, it is very important, right? I mean, obviously this is what I'm here to do and what I'm here to talk about, but it is your guys' security boundary for all of your traffic. If anyone's trying to get in or out, that's going to be the thing to stop or catch them. So, when a security company is only as good as the technology backing it up. And that's when you look at Fortinet and where we stand in the security space and you do the research on FortiGuard Labs, we've caught more zero-day threats in. Again, for me is to give you guys the information, understanding that we are a very top level security player in the space, but we are very fairly priced. So if it's something where it's, outside of that budget, that's the decision for you guys to make, obviously.
Yeah, and again, I appreciate you saying that. And I did spend time looking at some of your website information and kind of the scope of your product line. And it is my opinion based on, and by the way, I went to an engineering school. I have 2 degrees in engineering, and I was a software engineer. So I know a little bit about what we're talking about here. When I looked at your full scope of your product offering for a relatively small shop like us that is not in the business of IT is a service that allows us to do all the other things that we do. It seemed like there were the potential for matching our needs more closely with something that we could afford. And again, redundancy seems like the first thing that comes to mind for me. Like, again, to me, it looks like a very expensive insurance policy to essentially double our costs to have 2 firewalls. My understanding is one of them is a hot failover. Do we even need hot failover, right? Can we justify that from a business need perspective? And I suspect the answer might be no. So to George's point, I don't think we're here to solve this problem right now and make a decision about what we're going to choose for our firewall technology. And I appreciate you guys showing up. I think we should approve the expenditure for next year. But one of the things that I would love is for us to continue this conversation. And like I said, I don't have any, I did some research and I know what Gartner is in the upper right-hand quadrant, right? And you guys are a good vendor and you have a great reputation. I just think that there might be a way that we can work together in a path that's more affordable and sustainable for the county.
So I guess I would ask that you approve the full expenditure and you have my commitment to not make an expense to spend it until I come back with a proposal. But I'm gonna do that ASAP.
I agree.
We're talking about a firewall here. So we'll be back to you in January.
Well, actually, yeah, as quick as you can, for sure. I was thinking,
Right.
I heard 8 weeks.
Well, right. This concerns, I will go on record to say it concerns me greatly that we're talking about a firewall and we've got multiple cities and counties who have been hit, right? So we'll be back as soon as possible to hopefully justify whatever the next recommendation is, whether it's this one or something else.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
the thing that I'm pissed off about is that we're talking about this on December 14th, not on May 14th of 2022, and we would have had plenty of time to go through this process without the fire drill element to it.
Well, when we were back, I'm not so sure that's fair, but understood.
I think I agree with you, Brian. This is a conversation that we need to have come to a head. It's a conversation that staff's been trying to have with us for a long time, and we do need to figure out how to land the plane and do it quickly.
Right. We've been in a period of transition.
It's without some gratitude to staff for their patience.
So I'm not pissed off. I just want to get it done. So let's just, come back with that better recommendation or that ironclad justification for this one. So. Sorry, guys, I'm trying to kill this thing right now.
Well, I appreciate the time, guys. I'm gonna have to jump here, but as the vendor, obviously, I wanted to make our presence, and join and make sure that we're hearing what you guys are looking for as well. Because, as you said, we want to be a good partner for the entire county. We want to make sure you guys are spending the right money. We want to listen to what everyone's saying. So I appreciate the time and, letting me have a voice here on this call.
Thanks, Jordan.
And Mr. Wood, this is Michael. I also work with Jordan at Fortinet. I to your point, I've been around this block a long time, done a lot of architecture for large financial, healthcare, critical government, sheriffs, things of that nature. If you're looking to consolidate your IT operations and need to understand the CGIS compliance and things like that, I would just throw in my 2 cents, not as a Fortinet person, as a architect. Don't forego high availability, especially if you are representing and front-ending the sheriff's office. That'd be my only comment on that. Thank you for the time. Appreciate it.
High availability referencing having the redundancy as a failover and having that second one in place in the account of a brownout here, taking out the device and being able to switch it and get the county back up and going.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Brian, do you have the direction that you need?
I think I heard budget at the high level and we'll come back.
That's
Yes.
what
Okay. All right.
So moved.
Is there any more fun topics we can bring up today?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for your time and for carving out more time as we're approaching Christmas. I guess we have one more meeting next Tuesday and that'll be that. Is there anything, Pete or Brian, that you need before we adjourn this meeting now?
I don't think so, not from my perspective.
Okay.
So see you guys on Tuesday, huh?
Yep.
And that's in person, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'll see everybody then. We're adjourned.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bill.